All right, so I want to take just about 10 minutes to give you uh, a sort of a diagram for an essay. You don't need to use this model, but it might help work out how you want to structure your essay. So it looks basically like this. I'm imagining for the purposes of this that it's a 5 paragraph essay. So introduction, 3 paragraphs making up the body, and then your concluding paragraph. Each of these, of course, has its own functions, and so it needs particular things in it. With the introduction, you would open then with a broad statement to let your reader know what the topic of your paper is. You haven't said yet what your argument about it will be, but just this is the thing that I'm talking about. Then you give sort of like a little bit of a roadmap to your reader of what you're going to do in the paper to lay out your argument, the steps that you'll go through, say. And then finally, you conclude your introduction with a thesis statement. Something along the lines of, in this paper, I argue that, whatever you argue. Or this paper argues that, or in this paper I show that, whatever the case may be. And that's the work of the introduction. You're orienting your reader to the rest of the paper, letting your reader know what it is that you're going to say in the rest of the paper, so that as the paper unfolds, your reader knows what's going on. That brings us then to the body. So this is where you're going to lay out whatever it is that you use to support your paper. So if you've got, say, survey data or statistical data or something like that, you would lay it out in this section and interpret it to let the reader know why it's important. If you are arguing a more, say, philosophical paper or philosophical argument, then you might work through a series of logical inferences, in which case this is where you present them and show how it is that they hold together. So each paragraph then, or if it's a larger piece of writing, each section, but let's just stick with paragraphs. So with each paragraph, you'll have one topic in that paragraph. You won't introduce other topics into the paragraph. You just have that one. And at the end of the paragraph, if you want your paper to flow a little bit more nicely, you'll use what are symbolized by these S hooks here. You'll use a line or two at the end of the paragraph to set up the next paragraph, so that you can see how one step of the argument leads into the next one, how they connect together, so that your paper flows together. It doesn't have sort of fits and starts where it's not clear how one section relates to the others, but rather you're letting your reader see how it is that the parts hang together into one sort of continuous, coherent argument. And then finally, you get to your conclusion, which is kind of just a reverse of the introduction. So you start by restating your thesis. In this paper, I've demonstrated that, whatever. In this paper, I've argued that, or I've shown that, whatever phrasing you want to use. You restate what it is that the reader should now believe, what it is that you've argued. Next, you'll give just sort of a very brief revisitation of the steps that you took to get here. And then you can wrap it up by just gesturing, right? So you're not making a further argument here. You're not offering new evidence. You shouldn't offer any new evidence or any new argumentation in the conclusion. That all belongs in the body. But this final stage, then, you might just gesture to what the larger implications of your argument may be. And that will do it. That will wrap it. So let me give you a couple of examples. These are just made up examples for me. Now, for an ethnographic project, let's say I would want to open my introduction by saying, In this paper, I'm describing a rite connected with the Buddhist New Year in Thailand. Then, for the next part of the introduction, I'll go on to say I'm going to employ a Durkheimian functionalist framework in order to show that this rite has a particular function within the congregation, and I will describe the particular ceremony itself, and then I will argue the point that the function, and this is the very bottom, the tip of the introduction here, I will argue that the function of this rite and rites like it are to bring coherence to the congregation, to bring a sense of belonging, a sense of camaraderie to the congregation itself. Okay, so fine. Then, in the body. So first of all, let's say I want to start off with the, let's say I start off with the theory. So I'll explain how functionalism, as Durkheim describes it, let's say just from his book on religion, I'll say what we see there is that religion doesn't exist as a separate realm from the rest of sociality, but rather it's integrated into it in such a way that religious practice and religious rites function to sustain a congregation. And that will mean sustain in a bunch of ways, not just a feeling of belonging together, but of belonging together according to particular sorts of moral precepts, let's say. Then I can go on to say that we can see in this ceremony the division of sacred and profane that Durkheim describes, because the entire ritual has to be performed in a particular way with particular accoutrements that I'll get to in a moment, in order to approach the sacred object, in this case the Buddha. Then, third paragraph, I'll describe the rite. So I'll say, okay, on the evening of the Buddhist New Year, I and some friends, actually they invited me, so I went with some friends who were going to a nearby temple. At the temple, we collected 3 incense sticks, a lotus, and a candle. And lighting the candle up, we all walk around. If you want to be fancy, you would say circumambulate the temple, all going in the same direction. There are lots of other people doing this as well. So there's this great feeling of all of us doing something together, even though we don't know the people beyond our group of friends, perhaps. There's this sense of enjoying a common practice that binds us together as a community. Okay, so then we circle 3 times. Has to be 3. And then you go into the temple itself. You light the incense and plant it in a particular place. The candle goes in a specific place. The lotus goes in a specific place. And then you kneel down in front of the Buddha. You prostrate yourself before the Buddha. And then you sit with your hands held in a Y. And maybe at that point also you ask for the Buddha to help you out with something in your life, or help out a friend with something in his or her life, something like that. So you're essentially praying to the Buddha to intervene, to help out with something. You do that, we finish that, and then we all go off for ice cream. I'll get back to why that matters in a moment. So then what you can see from this is that this adheres closely to a functionalist model and to Durkheim's division of sacred and profane, because the way that you engage with the sacred object, the Buddha statue, within the sacred space, the temple, requires a particular kind of ritualistic behavior that has to be done in a more or less particular way, and has specific things, these accoutrements, the candle, the incense, the lotus that I was talking about. So then that's the ritual. And then the running off to get ice cream afterward together looks like we're re-entering the realm of the profane. But then the argument that I would make, this would be the thesis, would be that the reason that we can re-enter the profane world with this feeling of togetherness has to do with having participated in this ritual, the sacred ritual, in the first place. So that the effect and the function of engaging in the sacred ritual is that we feel this kind of togetherness, so that when we go off for ice cream together, we're not just simply going as friends, but we're going as friends whose friendship has been enriched and sustained by our shared membership in this congregation, a membership that has been exemplified by our participation in this ritual. And so then that would be when I restate the thesis, say, I've shown in this paper that participation in this New Year's celebration at the temple, this sacred rite, has a community building or a congregation building effect. I've shown this by the engagement in the particular rite and the ritual qualities that that rite entails, the specific practices we need to engage in to be a member of this congregation, and that by doing so we become a member of the congregation, and how that fits with the Durkheimian picture of functionalism. And then I might conclude with the sort of the gesture beyond, which is to say that we can see how engagement in the sacred has this kind of congealing influence in the profane world afterward. Okay, so that's one example. Let's take another example. Now, Thailand is a kingdom. It's a constitutional monarchy, right? So there is a constitution that establishes the laws and, in theory, lays out the role of the monarchy within the nation. But within the constitution, there's also a lèse-majesté law. That is a law that is specifically designed to prosecute people who say, write, or reproduce defamatory words or images about the monarchy. It could be the king, it could be any member of the royal family. It might be extended to include the larger entourage around the royal family. One of the things about lèse-majesté is that its limits are not especially clear. But that's how it is. So the laws in Thailand are particularly strict, and the punishments are quite severe. So then in the introduction, I might open by saying, this is a paper that engages lèse-majesté law in Thailand. It will study the different ways that people have conceived of lèse-majesté law through the idea of lèse-majesté as a kind of defamation law, or lèse-majesté as a kind of law governing treason. And it will make the case, and so here I'm down at the bottom part, that the clearest way to understand lèse-majesté in Thailand is as blasphemy law. So then I will go to the different sections where I'll explore the different ways that people have thought of lèse-majesté as a kind of defamation law, as a kind of treason law. I'll explore then in another paragraph how kingship in Thailand is inextricably tied to Buddhism. And that is because the king is understood as someone who has accumulated so much merit in previous lives as to be born into the kingship and to deserve it, and therefore to deserve the reverence of that position. So that you can start to see then how lèse-majesté is not something that is just, say, political in nature, like treason. It's not something that is just about libelous or defamatory speech. It's not just about those things, but it's actually an attack on a religious principle. So that in order to get a clear view of why it is that it's punished so severely, you have to understand then that as a religious principle, it is felt by the populace, in theory, the whole populace. In fact, probably only a small sector that is very committed to the monarchy. But it's felt by them that defamatory statements about the king impugn the entire integrity of the kingdom itself. So that the idea would be, if you were allowed to say whatever you wanted, whatever defamatory thing that you wanted about the royal family, it would lead to the complete dissolution of the society as a whole. So then the argument would be, that is why it is best to conceptualize lèse-majesté as a form of blasphemy law rather than as these other kinds. So then I get to the final part, restate the thesis. Lèse-majesté is fundamentally a blasphemy law rather than a simply defamation law or a law concerning treason. As previous writers have understood it, this is because of the intrinsic tie between Buddhist concepts like merit or karma and the kingship in Thailand, and that the broader implication of this then, so something that I haven't talked about necessarily in the paper, but that I want to point toward as, say, another line of potential inquiry. The broader implication of this then is that introducing constitutional reforms that would change the position of the monarchy could be perilous because it would be exposed to lèse-majesté punishments. And so those would be a couple of examples of what this kind of structure would look like, how the paper would unfold according to this model. And so, yeah, I hope that that's helpful in working out how you want to organize your papers and give you a sense of what one model would look like.